We have new insights on the RCMP's investigation into Indian officials tonight, with the commissioner connecting alleged murder and extortion to the top levels of the Indian government. It's been nearly 2 weeks since Mike Duheme took the extraordinary step of warning the public.
The team has learned a significant amount of information about the breadth and depth of criminal activity orchestrated by agents of the Government of India.
Canada and India each expelled 6 of each other's diplomats, but ever since, we've been waiting for updates on the remaining threats to Canadians. So what have police achieved since going public? Mike Duheme is the commissioner of the RCMP, and he joins me now. Commissioner, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
I want to start with the latest on the India investigation that the force has been dealing with. You said when you went public with this on Thanksgiving that the goal is to disrupt what was happening through India and the agents of the government of India. Have you succeeded in reducing the threat against people?
I can confirm with the investigation techniques that we have that we've had a significant impact on public safety in the South Asian communities.
How so? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Is it just general awareness, or is it kicking out the diplomats that has done
Well,
this?
the fact that the RCMP was able to gather enough evidence to share with the government, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Safety, as well as the Minister of Global Affairs Canada, for them to take that the position to expel 6 diplomats. I think that in itself, the evidence speaks highly of the quality of the work that we've done. And then from community outreach and other means, we know that we had a significant impact.
Okay, because there was 13 people, I believe, who had been served a duty of care warrant, who had been informed of a threat against their safety. Are those 13 in any better of a situation now? Has the threat levels against them subsided?
I'd say based on what we have right now, they're in a better place. But this speaks to how an investigation sometimes can ebb and flow. And you're right, 13 we said at the press conference since September 2023. When we have a duty to warn, obviously you're looking at an imminent threat. It has to be credible for us to go and talk to the individual. And when you don't have those, and based on the intelligence, when I say intelligence, criminal intelligence you have, you know, it's in a position where we consider it a serious threat to the communities.
So is it still at that level of 13, or has the number been reduced?
I think we're still at the same number. Okay. And you got to remember, a duty to warn is we receive credible information that is imminent. We go and talk to you and explain the information that we have, and then after that, the threat is either mitigated by other means or whatnot. So.
Okay, so I know these 6 diplomats have been expelled, and of course India denies they were doing anything wrong, but based on the information that has been shared in briefings and through reporting, obviously these diplomats, they're not pulling the trigger, they're not even necessarily reaching out to the alleged criminal gangs that have been hired to do this or collecting information. So there is still a network of some sort in Canada, or associates of some sort in Canada. So how much of it do you believe is still in place, even with the expulsion of these 6?
I truly believe, again, based on the information that we have, is that we've had a significant impact on how they were operating. This is not unique in Canada. I bring you back last week, the indictments in the States from a government official, Government of India official who was in India, who was working with someone from the organized crime group who had looked at contracting a murder on an American citizen. So it's a pattern that we've seen here. It's obviously a pattern that the Americans have seen. So we're in a comfortable position that since they've been expelled, that we're in a better position.
Okay.
But again, David, I got to highlight that when you're dealing with organized crime figures, you can deal with it, but they usually regroup and find different tactics. But our investigators on the ground monitoring everything that's going on.
Right. In terms of what happened with the U.S., this was the indictment against Vikash Yadav, along with Nikhil Gupta, who were charged with the murder for hire plot of Gurpatwan Singh Panan. Okay. But in that case, and in what we've seen in the allegations here, the assertion is that this runs quite high up in the Modi government. People such as Amit Shah, who is a minister in the Modi government, his national security advisor was informed by Deputy Commissioner Flynn and others. What is your sense of how high up this runs in the Modi government in terms of what you have told the government and what you've alleged and what you said publicly?
Again, the RCMP had made efforts to meet with the Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn's counterpart in India to sit down with them and explain what we had at the highest level. That was unsuccessful, which led us to join the NSIA as well as Deputy Minister of Global Affairs Canada in Singapore to meet with an Indian official. And at that meeting, the Deputy Commissioner did present evidence as to how agents of the government of India, through diplomats and consular officials, were collecting information on their behalf on Canadians, bringing it back to the government of India, and that would flow through actionable items to organized crime groups. You've heard Bishnoi's in the past, organized crime group to actually initiate certain criminalities on Canadian soil.
But I saw there's reporting in the Washington Post, and I want to touch on that in just a second, that there was evidence provided that links this to Amit Shah, who is a very senior minister in the Modi government. Is that in fact the case, what you've uncovered?
Well, I can't speak about the evidence. So what I can share with regards to Washington Post, I did read the article, and you have to appreciate that we did work with the NSIA and Global Affairs Canada as we were preparing for our press conference on October 14th. Some wish to have a broader audience, and the RCMP was responsible for structuring or putting together a package in which could provide media. I was not there. I did not take part of the conversation. So when they say about evidence, I'm not quite sure if it was from the package that we submitted, which didn't have any evidence, or, as you can appreciate, any news reporter has multiple sources that can provide the information.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand that correctly, because there's been reporting in the Globe and Mail, and it does seem pretty clear, based on the details that were in the Washington Post the day you went public, that they have been briefed in advance by senior officials in the Government of Canada. Are you saying you were aware that the Government of Canada intended to do that, and you gave them a set of guardrails surrounding the information that would be safe to brief the media?
It was discussed amongst us that not only the Canadian media, but maybe far outreaching, so that we can avoid any misinformation, disinformation from India. And we provided, if you wish, the parameters in which could be shared.
Was there any when you read what was in the Washington Post, do you think the case was jeopardized? Do you think classified information was shared with people who didn't necessarily have the clearance? Did it go beyond the scope of what you suggested to the government they should do?
I'm not aware of what was discussed. I didn't take part in those conversations. I can assure you that the parameters that we set out obviously is nothing to do that would impede investigation or affect something that's before the courts.
But it's an interesting thing that with all of the heightened concern over leaks of classified intelligence, with the foreign interference inquiry going on and that political controversy, that we do read in an American newspaper a briefing from Canadian officials about a Canadian investigation of the murder of a Canadian. I mean, were you surprised to see that there, or were you aware, as the head of the RCMP, that this was going to happen prior to your news conference?
As I mentioned, in order to have maximum impact on the actions we've taken, we were looking at a broader audience, and when I say we is government, was looking at a broader audience, and again I go back to what was structured to provide to other media if they wanted information. This was what it was.
Okay, so you gave, is this information, some reporting I've read and some conversations I've had, that a lot of this is information that would either be in the U.S. indictments, come out in the U.S. court process, or might very well be turned over to defense in disclosure here in Canada as part of the criminal proceedings that are happening here. Is that what this is pulled from in large part?
It would be pulled from anything it would be pulled out of the open information that we had, some of the things that we've expressed on Thanksgiving Day. We wouldn't go into anything that would link to ongoing files, or anything that could jeopardize a case that's before the courts.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what could be before the courts, because you referenced the indictment in the United States where a former research and analysis wing operative has been charged. So that's the Indian intelligence operation. Do you think you will get to the point that someone from India, from the Indian government, could be charged for a crime here in Canada?
We have multiple ongoing investigations, and I always say that you never know from seizing a phone, going through information in the phone, or talking to someone where that might lead you. But we do have strong evidence, not intelligence, but evidence that this goes all the way up to the highest level.
Okay, so what we've seen in the United States, because their disclosure is more robust and earlier in the process, much to the frustration of journalists here in Canada, but there are similarities in what we believe to be the case here versus the murder for hire plot we talked about there. It is almost like this was the modus operandi, it would appear.
Yeah. Based on what I read on the indictments, yeah, there seems to be a pattern, and I do agree the judicial process that we have here and what the U.S. has is completely different.
Yep.
They disclose everything up front, and continue the investigation while we have to go through our judicial process before the courts to disclose anything.
So you say you have evidence that this goes to the highest levels of the Indian government. I mean, Prime Minister Modi has obviously rejected this. His national security advisor has rejected it, and there is a pretty intense public relations, if not propaganda campaign to push back against this. The evidence that you have, is this something that will be disclosed in court? Is this something that could lead to an indictment of an Indian official who is overseas and maybe beyond your reach, but is it of that weight and seriousness that we can see that sort of action?
So I go back, David, that the fact that the evidence that we were able to produce put the government in a position that they trusted the RCMP with the evidence that they had to expel 6 diplomats. And some of the evidence that I'm referring to will eventually come out through the judicial process that we're in right now.
But I wonder, sir, then, and maybe you can't answer this, but will we have a name of who at the highest levels of the Indian government was directing this or is believed to be directing this? Could we see a charge against them? Because I appreciate expelling the diplomats, because you can't charge them because of diplomatic immunity. That wasn't waived. But I don't want to say they aren't held accountable, but they get to go home, and they were probably going to go home anyway. What about criminal acts, a criminal charge against somebody?
Again, there's some ongoing investigations, and I'll leave it at that you never know what it might uncover. So.
Okay, so obviously your work isn't done, and probably India's work is not done on this. I mean, do you anticipate we will see further operations of this kind in Canadian soil in the near future? You said they may regroup, criminal organizations could regroup. I mean, what are your thoughts on the possibility of you having to deal with something like this again?
I mean, we've obviously, in my 37 years career, this is the first time I actually see this, so we've learned a lot from it. We've actually shared with some of our international partners what we're seeing here on Canadian soil. We've learned a lot, and we're monitoring what's going on. Not only us, but we work with our intelligence unit as well. So we're monitoring what's going on and making sure that we stay on top of it.
The Americans are getting cooperation from India, or at least what appears to be cooperation, which is what has led to this arrest. Canada is getting nothing even close to cooperation. They're getting obstruction and denial. Why do you think it's responding to similar allegations in such different ways?
Well, I think the broader issue is probably not just necessarily with law enforcement, but it's the overall relationship that Canada has with India, which goes far beyond my pay grade.
Okay. I know you were involved with this because of the threat to public safety and the crimes that were being alleged. But there is reporting through public documents of political interference by India. Most recently would be conservative leadership races. Is the RCMP investigating that in any way?
We do have, and I actually mentioned that at the press conference on October 14th, that there's 4 key areas we're looking at. One of them was political interference.
But specifically on leadership races, nominations, what can you zero it down?
I'm not gonna zero in on anyone other than we are investigating.
Okay, because people will hear that and draw conclusions. I mean, what would you caution them against concluding from what you've just said there?
Well, let us do our job. Let us do an investigation. If charges are warranted, everything will come through our judicial process.
Okay, a final point on a slightly different topic of letting you do your job. There is this privilege debate happening in the House of Commons where the opposition parties are united in trying to compel the disclosure of documents. They hand them over to you so you can do a criminal investigation into what they call the Green Slush Fund, the Social Development Technology Fund, I believe it's called, which was riddled with problems. You have said, and the Auditor General has said, you don't see criminality. You wrote a letter saying using the legislature to give us these documents is not a great way to do it because it could impact the investigation. What are your thoughts on where this stands right now? And what would you say to the MPs who say they're doing this to help you?
Well, David, I'll go back to when the Office of the Auditor General does her work. If she comes across any criminality, she's to stop her investigation and get us involved, which didn't happen. She said it quite frankly, that she did not see any criminality. We are going through the information that's available in the public domain. We did, as you referred, we did pick up a USB stick that went through the law courts from what he was mandated to do, and we do have in possession that stick, and that would be part of investigation. But I am mindful, because in that letter I do mention about charter. We have to be careful because the way law enforcement operates is within this judicial framework. And every time, if I'm investigating, I need grounds to get a search warrant to obtain this information, and so forth, and eventually to maybe lay charges. The Office of the Auditor General operates in different circumstances, different set of rules, and you can't just take something from her report, bounce it into the criminal space. Nor can you obtain information that normally that the law enforcement would not be able to obtain within the judicial process. So what you see here is the executive branch and the legislative branch, where the legislative branch is bringing documents into the executive branch. So we have the key, and we'll exhaust everything in the public domain first before we even look at the key.
Okay, so this is the data, the documents that were forced to be compelled, and not everything has come out, that the law clerk of the House of Commons handed over to you. So you have that sequestered from your main investigation. Can you use this? Or is this the political nature of this collection of this evidence and the compulsion of these documents? Is it too fraught, or is it of any value to you, is what I'm trying to understand here?
We're still discussing the way forward, and as you can appreciate, everything we do has to be charter compliant, and we will make sure that we are charter compliant with everything we do as we move forward with this investigation.
Okay, one last question. You maybe can't answer this, but when you said the Auditor General didn't find criminality, you wrote that you did not see criminality in what was publicly available. Has that changed?
Right now, the latest update I have was last week, and we're going through the Ethics Commissioner's report and any other available documents. But as it stands right now, the investigation is ongoing.
It's ongoing. So, but has it changed from, or you just can't answer this?
I haven't. My briefing was a week and a half ago, so I
Right.
wouldn't want to. Next week something comes up that we have information, so I wouldn't want to go down that.
Understood, but as of a week ago, you weren't ready to lay any criminal charges?
No.
Okay. Mike Duheme, I always appreciate the candor to the limits of what you can do. That's Mike Duheme, the Commissioner of the RCMP. Appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, David.